So the topic that I'm going to be discussing today is sustainability in concreting practices. So concreting can be defined as the process of making concrete and applying concrete. Okay, so there is one will not coexist without the other. So first we will discuss about how to make sustainable concrete, and then we can look at the application aspects of it. Okay. In the contents, we will be talking mainly about sustainable concrete. That's going to be the big chunk of our presentation. And we will talk about cement, and then followed by supplementary cementitious materials. Then we'll talk a little bit about fine aggregate, our alternative options, coarse aggregate, our options there, and how to make this concrete sustainable and wholesome. Finally, we will look at some applications of sustainable concrete mixes, some innovative applications, some practical use cases we can go through. Okay, so what is conventional concrete? So this, I think we all are very familiar. You take cement and then you mix it with zone 2 river sand. Zone 2 is preferred for workable concrete. Then you have your coarse aggregate or your stones. Then you mix it with water. That becomes your basic concrete mix. Now, if you want your mix to be a little more flowable, you can add high range water reducer, also called as your super plasticizer. If you need some air in it to make it freeze thaw resistant, then you might add air entrainer. So these are the basic chemical admixtures we usually use to make conventional concrete mixes. So now let's take a look at what sustainable and durable concrete is and how do we produce it. So this is nothing but the same basic concrete, with the exception that you're adding mineral admixtures to bring about high performance in the concrete. Okay, so you still have cement, you have your sand as your fine aggregate, you have your stones as coarse aggregate, and then water with chemical admixtures and mineral admixtures. Okay. So usually your sustainable and durable concretes are designed for strength and durability in accordance to some codal provisions. Okay, so they're not eyeballed, they're actually designed. So IS 10262, the 2019 version, is the mixed design code for making normal concrete and even high strength concrete. And IS 456 is, as you're all familiar with, standard code of practice for concrete, right? So equivalent in American standards is ACI 211. .1. So this was published in 2002 and reapproved in 2009. So that's the current edition. ACI 318 is the our equivalent of IS 456. So all these talk about, if you look in detail, it talks about what all mineral admixtures you can use and what should be the minimum cement content for certain exposure contents, what should be the minimum air entrainment for weather exposure. It also gives you how much should be the minimum and maximum cement content from durability perspective. Okay, so these codal provisions will help us guide there. Next, emphasis should always be on high performance concrete over high strength concrete. So I once happened to meet Dr. Mark, and he happens to be the materials manager, quality materials manager for the World Trade Center. He had come for a department level meeting and a presentation at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. So he gave a talk on high performance concrete. So right at the end, I told, isn't high strength concrete the same as high performance concrete? Back then, the same day, I had actually come with a student batch, and we had won a student beam casting competition. So we had managed to get 10,000 PSI concrete strength. So that's about almost M90 grade concrete strength, and we had that in about 7 days. So we actually formed the group, made the competition, won the prize, and I told him, so this concrete is very impervious and it's high strength concrete. What do you think? Isn't that high performance? So he told me this might be high strength, but high strength and high performance are not synonymous. For example, I can make high strength concrete with quartz or silica fume as one of the admixture, which is a mineral admixture. Okay, so but when you're looking at that high strength concrete mix, same 14,000 or 10,000 PSI concrete, if I mix it with silica fume and make it a concrete, and it's, let's say, accidentally exposed to fire. So because of the water vapor pressure and no way out, because it's a dense mix, there can be sudden spalling or failure. But compare that to a high performance mix where you can achieve the same strength, but with a different set of admixtures. Okay, it could be fly ash blended it with silica fume and suitable water cement ratio. You will still get the same strength, but now this is more durable in the event of fire. So likewise, we can make our high strength concrete, high performance concrete, okay, owing to wherever or whichever weather condition the structure will be exposed to. So if you call this is a simple Venn diagram, high strength concrete. So we need to make our concrete both high strength and high performance concrete, but most cases just high performance concrete will be sufficient. What do we mean by high performance concrete? Even an M25 concrete can be high performance concrete and it can do well compared to M40 or M60 that may not have certain admixtures to counter certain weather conditions or exposure conditions. So that's what we will be discussing in the future slides. Now let's look at cement. This is one of the essential ingredient in your concrete. This is basically the binder, so most important ingredient. And cement is used to make concrete, and concrete is basically the second most consumed material on earth after water. Okay, so concrete is used to build everything from buildings, bridges, roads, runways, you name it. So it's basically very tightly integrated with economy, global economy and development. Okay, so we are right now producing about and growing about 2.5% annually in cement production, and it's expected to rise from 2.5 billion in 2006 to about 4 billion tons in 2050. Okay, so the amount of cement that is produced per year is going to keep increasing up to 2050, right? And we expect about 4 billion tons produced. So producing 1 ton of cement requires 4.7 million BTU, that's British thermal units of energy. It's equivalent to burning about 400 pounds of coal, roughly 200 kgs of coal, and it generates nearly 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So to produce 1 ton of cement, we will emit 1 ton of carbon dioxide. And BTU, British thermal unit, is basically a unit of energy. It's the amount of energy required to heat 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit in normal atmospheric pressure, which is 1 atmospheric pressure. So at the bottom, I've also given you the conversion to convert to joules, so you get an idea how much energy is consumed. Okay, and this single industry, cement industry, accounts for about 5% of global CO2 emissions. So that's a big chunk, correct? A single industry contributing to 5% of global carbon dioxide emissions. So cement production is both energy and emission intensive process, correct? So is there any work around it? Can we say no to cement and use something else? It's hard to say that, right? Because we've been using that over and over for how many years now? So ordinary Portland cement is here to stay, and it's kind of stood the test of time. We've been using this for making most structures, correct? Since the industrial civilization age, right? That's post World War II period. So we have to find some supplementary cementitious material or cement replacing materials that will help us consume less cement, in fact. So what are these supplementary cementitious materials, also called as SCMs? It is in fact the addition of these mineral admixtures that will make concrete sustainable. So is it approved by our codes? So if you go through IS 10262, this is the code for mixed design of concrete, you can actually see a part replacement of cement by fly ash, GGBS, ground granulated blast furnace slag, silica fume, and other mineral admixtures are allowed. Okay, up to 20% you can use. Anything more has to be guided by careful supervisions. Okay, and you can only increase it in 10% after performing certain trials. So there is some leeway right now, okay, in the amount of mineral admixtures that are allowed. And the percentage of fly ash GGBS to be used has to be decided, see, based on trial. So this is giving us permission. What all are the supplementary cementitious material? It's also listing for us. So IS 10262 says it is okay. And section 5.4 deals with production of normal grade of concrete or normal strength concrete. It goes anywhere from M25 to about M55. Okay. Now, what does IS 456 tell us at the same time? It says fly ash can be used, silica fume can be used. Now there are 2 new additions along with GGBS. It says rice husk ash can be used and metakaolin can be used. So how do we get fly ash? So most of you will already be familiar. It's based from your thermal power plants that predominantly use coal as fuel, correct? So there are 2 types of fly ash. We can discuss more on that in the future slides, class C and class F. Okay, and silica fume is basically coming from your iron industry. Okay, so this is actually not a byproduct. Okay, or it's a byproduct of an industry. It's not a waste material that's generated. It has a lot of uses, and you can see it's also coming from an energy intensive process. Okay, and it says IS 456 says about 5 to 10% of this mixture is allowed. Okay, for IS fly ash, it's not saying how much can be used, but for silica fume, it's specifying the ideal limit. Same thing if you look at rice husk ash, this is produced by burning rice husk, okay, which is an agricultural byproduct, okay, and it contains large amount of silica. That's why we can use this, but it has to be burnt in a controlled state, okay. So only then we will get the ash that has the desirable properties to qualify as a supplementary cementitious material. Also, if you look at the SEF image of it, you will see some fibrous texture also on it, okay, and XRF image, sorry. So basically, we have to ensure that under controlled temperature, it's been burnt and it loses most of its fiber texture, but retains its powdery texture. Then we can definitely use. But we have to carefully monitor the water demand, okay, of it and how much shrinkage it can cause. Shrinkage is nothing but the volume change. Also, metakaolin, this is also waste material, but the byproduct. Okay, metakaolin having fineness between 700 to 900 meters square per kg. It's obtained by calcination of pure kaolinite clay. So we do use kaolinite clay in a lot of geological applications also, and making ceramics. So a low grade kaolinite clay can also be used, but look at the temperature in which it has to be burnt. So 650 to 850 degrees centigrade. That's almost half of how much your cement is taking to become a product. Followed by grinding. So you have to do that also to achieve a fineness of 700 to 900 meters square per kg. But it gives you good pozzolanic activity. So when you're making very high strength concrete, let's say concrete stronger than M80, M90, either silica fume or metakaolin is a must. So these are finer than your cement particles, so they definitely help fill the voids and give you better strength. So now IS 456 also tells you you can use GGBS, which is ground granulated blast furnace slag, okay, for the mix. And you have to follow the instructions in IS 10289 or whatever that's conforming to. So there is a code even for that, and there are some detailed guidelines in here that you can follow GGBS. Next is IS 10262 2019. So this, if you look at section 6 deals with the normal high strength concrete. Section 5 of your IS 10262 dealt with normal strength concrete. So here it also lists what all admixtures or mineral admixtures you can use, basically supplementary cementitious material. It says fly ash is permitted, silica fume, GGBS, and slag or metakaolin. So all these are permitted. See, metakaolin and silica fume are definitely there when you are manufacturing or producing high strength concrete. Okay, so that's must. So all these are recognized SCMs from the two codes. Okay, now here are the recommended dosages by IS 10262. So this definitely goes beyond what IS 456 said. For example, it limited up to 20% unless you know what you are doing, but IS 10262 says you can go up to 30% by mass. Okay, and GGBS can be used in 25 to 50%. Okay, so of cement can be replaced when you do this. Metakaolin 5 to 15%, silica fume 5 to 10%. So if you can see, the least will be the silica fume. It's very expensive. In fact, a bag of cement is more expensive than a bag of a bag of silica fume is more expensive than a bag of cement. So you definitely don't want to use it beyond the recommended dosage. Okay. And metakaolin is also there. It's also expensive, more than cement, but not as much as silica fume. So you can go up to 15%. Usually they end up between 7 to 10% only, either of these compounds if they go in high strength concrete. For the remaining portion, they always go with fly ash and or GGBS, okay, to make very high performance concrete. Right. So what are the benefits of basically using these supplementary cementitious material that we just saw? It improves the workability and strength due to pozzolanic activity. Pozzolanic activity is nothing but the rate of your hydration process, okay, where the pozzolan is actually reacting with the Ca2 or hydroxide ions of your cement. Okay. Okay, so in that process, because of the spherical nature of and fineness nature of these SCMs, you get better workability also. So you can save a little more on your admixtures. Okay, so when you're producing bulk concrete, it definitely saves. Also, it increases the water tightness. This is especially if you are going to use silica fume. It makes a cohesive mix. It prevents bleeding. Okay, so it makes the mix more pastier. Okay, and it improves the resistance to sulfate attacks. So if a soil is rich in sulfate, and that can start getting into the concrete, and those salts, when it crystallizes, can expand and make it from cracks can become spalling in no time, and corrosion can set in. So these SCMs, they are so finer, they actually work well with the ITZ, interfacial transition zone, and then they form better bonds between your aggregates and your cement particles. Okay, makes it less impervious, okay, less impervious to water and salts. So it also reduces your alkali aggregate reaction, because when using less cement, there will also be less alkalis in the process, and the fly ash is an inert material, so more of it can definitely help reduce, okay, alkali interaction between the alkali and your aggregate. Okay, and reduces thermal shrinkage. So your class F fly ash, for instance, has low calcium oxide content, but it can moderate or control the rate of hydration, okay, and also the amount of heat that is emitted in the process. So that's why it also helps in that process, and lowers susceptibility to leaching. So leaching, I will discuss a little bit more when I'm discussing that Brooklyn Bridge rehabilitation project case that we did. Okay, so it's basically like when you keep concrete and it's exposed to water, okay, water bodies. So we don't want harmful chemicals from the concrete getting into the water body that will find its way to us. Okay, so that those bad effects of concrete should not happen just because you're using a supplementary cementitious material. Concrete should not degrade. Okay, next, chemical composition of common mineral admixture. So let's try to understand how these are organized chemically. Okay, so cement, OPC stands for ordinary Portland cement. You see 65% of it by mass is calcium oxide. Okay, so that's the biggest composition in ordinary Portland cement. If you look at GGBFS, that has 40% of it. That's why they say GGBS or ground granulated blast furnace slag, GGBS. It's also called that. That's why this can be, replacing cement by 50% or even 70%, they say. Compare that to fly ash, class C and class F fly ash. Class C has more cementitious material in it because it has higher amount of calcium oxide, as you can see. Okay, it's definitely higher than 5%. Okay, so class F fly ash will usually have calcium oxide under 5%. Okay, so but it's good in absorbing the heat of hydration, and this basically your class C fly ash acts as a cement itself because of this higher calcium oxide content. So the more is available when you mix it with regular Portland cement. So the pozzolanic activity takes place, resulting in the stronger formation of CSH gel. That means better bond, better concrete, stronger concrete, and less impervious. Okay. And see GGBFs, like I said, since it's higher percentage, you can replace cement by higher percentage. So if GGBS is not available everywhere, you can consider blending it with fly ash as well, class C fly ash. So there are some options for you. Okay, and silica fume is very fine filler material. It has very high silica. Okay, so this can definitely help in the formation of silicate hydrate. So more silica is there, provided there is some available for in the hydration process. Like if you add your Portland cement and class C fly ash, this also has certain amount of silicate, so there will be excess in it. So that's why you don't need silica fume too much. In the range of 7 to 10% is plenty enough. Okay, so this is very fine, can definitely fill the voids between cement particles and do a job of fine aggregate, if we want to call that. Okay, so this information was taken from NPTEL course on advanced concrete technology. Okay. Next, let's move on to fly ash and try to understand how we get the supplementary cementitious material. So fly ash is the fine residue, and it's resulting from the combustion of coal, basically used in power plants or thermal plants. Okay, and a collection method for fly ash includes cyclonic separator and electric precipitator. So fly ash is most widely used pozzolanic material. Okay, so depending on what kind of separators they have, you'll be able to get higher quality fly ash. Okay, so this is the microstructure of fly ash. It's spherical in nature. Okay, because of that, we get more fluid activity or workability when it interacts with water. So it's usually grayish color. So sometimes it can be dark color also. It depends on the source of the wood that is basically used, whether it's bituminous coal or non-bituminous coal. So that kind of affects the color of your fly ash. But if you look at it, it's about 20 micron to 100 micron in size, and it's finer than cement. So definitely it can help in strengthening the ITZ and also improving the pozzolanic. Broadly classifies fly ash into two classes, class F and class C. As you've already seen, class F fly ash has calcium oxide typically under 5%, okay, and class C has definitely more than 10%, okay. And class F has pozzolanic properties, okay. That means it can react with your cement particles as a secondary product of hydration, okay. But your class C fly ash, since it has calcium oxide, it helps in primary as well as secondary hydration products. It helps in the formation of those, okay. So calcium oxide is there for ready interaction, and then silica in it can also help form secondary hydration products. So class C fly ash is typically when you or sub-bituminous coal, and clay fly ash is typically obtained when you burn anthracite and bituminous-based coals. So thermal power plants have rare they will use. It's just a fuel for them to be producing electricity. So based on that, batch after batch, the condition of the fly ash might differ, okay, or different kinds might be there. It can vary in your calcium oxide content, especially. So that's why we have to be careful about the source, especially when you're going for high volume fly ash concrete. You have to do X-ray characterization of XRD characterization of this fly ash, so you know the typical composition. If not, that can definitely affect the strength of your end product. It might take way more than 28 days to achieve the required strength. Okay. So what we learned is fly ash improves workability and flow of concrete due to its spherical particle shape. Okay, hence lesser water cement ratio may be required for making concrete. So you're saving on water, making it concrete more sustainable. But setting time can increase. Okay, the more amount of fly ash you use, the initial setting time can increase. Okay, but it will definitely reduce the heat of hydration as it partly replaces cement. For mass concrete pours, class F fly ash is now a must. Okay. Now this is taken from Advanced Concrete Technology course. Here we have certain mixes made out of fly ash and only OPC. Okay, so if you see this blue line here, this blue line, the first one, that is made with water cement ratio of 0.42, and it's only cement, 100% OPC. Okay, the very first line here, blue, it's made with 100% OPC, 0.42 water cement ratio. Okay, and if you look at this far line in here, that's made with 0.32 water cement ratio. It has 35% fly ash and 5% silica. Fly ash and silica is there, making up 40% of it, 0.32 water cement ratio. So here you have water cement ratio of 0.3 with high range water reducer. So you're typically targeting the same workability or consistency. Okay, and you can see 0.3 water cement ratio cement with high range water reducer, and 0.42 cement water cement ratio with 100% cement. They are performing similarly. But when you're adding up to 40% fly ash and limestone, initial setting time is kind of increasing. You can see the depth of penetration of your bicat needle apparatus, it's increasing. Okay, so if you're planning to use this for a pavement, then probably high volume fly ash may not be required. And if you're planning to go for other kind of structural materials where you can give additional curing time, or if you're using accelerating admixtures, then using higher amount of fly ash can be okay. Along with high range water reducer, you can still get this to perform like this and get additional benefits. Okay, so now you have to weigh the cost of an additional admixture required that will increase the rate of strength, because now you've saved on the amount of cement that can be used, only 40% less cement you're using. So you can consider investing that. Or you can also study if initial setting time is increased a little bit, final setting time can be increased by a couple of hours, and if that is okay. So it's depending on the project, you can make that decision. So what we are trying to tell here is higher replacements of fly ash greater than 30% definitely affects it setting characteristics. Okay, and it's necessary to use fine additives like silica fume or fine limestone to bring it in place. So if you don't want to use an accelerating admixture, considering using lesser water cement ratio and combine it with limestone and or silica fume, so that will pull it back. So those help in fastening the rate of your hydration, and okay, it will perform as good as your or better as than your 100% OPC. Alternatively, we can again lower the water binder ratio, okay, or water cement ratio as we have seen. Okay, but in that case, high range water reducer or super plasticizer is required. Okay. Some of the effects of fly ash concrete on fly ash concrete as 28 days, and 28 day might be on par with your ordinary Portland cement, especially if you're using Class C fly ash. If not, it will be lagging in your 3 day and 7 day. 28 days it will catch up with Class C fly ash, but with Class F fly ash it might be 56 days or 90 days. So it also depends on how much amount you've basically used for this process. Okay. Next, ultimate strength are usually improved when fly ash is added. Okay, so if you look at a product, let's say M30 grade concrete made with 100% OPC, and if you look at the same concrete made with 90% OPC and 10% supplementary cementitious material, okay, at 28 days it might be the same, but at 90 days or beyond that, if you compare, the one which has the supplement cementitious product will be more stronger and also more durable. So don't think only 100 OPC based concrete will give me the best mix or the best strength. Okay, so creepage and shrink is something that you have to be in control with or monitor when you're using fly ash. Okay, especially more than that 20% or 30% that's recommended by the code, because now there is more amount of paste in the concrete, especially when mass concreting is done. Okay, so more air entraining admixture is needed to entrain air in fly ash, especially Class C fly ash that has higher carbon content. If you want 4% or 6% air, you will have to use higher dosage of air entraining admixture. Okay, and it also depends on the temperature. So usually it consumes more air entraining, and you need air entrainment in your concrete to better counter the freeze thaw resistance. Okay, so if you have a pavement that's subjected to constant freezing and thawing, air entrained concretes do way better than non-air entrained concrete, and a minimum 4% up to 6% of air is recommended by ACI code for freeze thaw conditions. And if you increase the air content, correspondingly the compressive strength, because it's more voids in there, compressive strength of concretes will try to fall. So expansion during alkali aggregate reaction are reduced if you use fly ash, okay? Because now there is less amount of Portland cement, so less amount of alkalis available. Plus the ITC zone is also more better in case of fly ash concrete, and also it's already less impervious. Correct, it's more impervious. That means it's not allowing more water to enter into the concrete. Hence, AAR reaction rate will be reduced. Next, high density concrete can be produced, or high strength concrete or high performance concrete, because it has very minimal voids. Correspondingly, your durability is also increased. Okay, so now let's look at high volume fly ash. Okay, concrete. So normally about 10 to 30% by weight of cement is replaced by fly ash. Okay, high volume fly ash means more than 55% will be used. Okay, and so the entrained air content of it, because you're using high volume fly ash, is typically between 5 to 7%. So higher volume of fly ash is definitely suited for freeze thaw conditions. Okay, and next, it requires less water content because of the more pozzolanic activity that you get from the increased use of fly ash. Okay, it has longer setting time. This we are already familiar with. It makes economical concrete because the amount of cement you're using is less, so the cost is less, and fly ash is practically free. Only transportation cost has to be accounted for. Or if your concrete batching plant is already using it, it makes their production rate also lower. Okay, less heat is generated, especially with Class F fly ash. Class C is also okay, but it's definitely better than your 100% OPC mix. Okay, and improved resistance to freeze thaw, high durability in marine environment. imperviousness is what stops the water ingress, and correspondingly the salt cannot get in, or even the acids or alkalis. Okay. So what are the barriers that we see that are stopping us from using this? Okay, so first we have difficult to assure the quality. We cannot say fly ash from your the Raichur thermal power plant is equal to or better than your Neyveli power plant, and you guarantee year round you get the same output of the fly ash. It depends on the source of the coal, so that somebody has to keep characterizing. So if this is something quality control is taken care of by the power plants itself, then it will definitely make the job of cement manufacturers easy. Much more of fly ash will definitely be consumed readily by the cement manufacturers. Okay, and poor marketing, we still have to improve the outreach of or the benefits of your fly ash concrete. People still have conservative attitudes. They always think I should use Birla 53 grade cement and that will make my job easy, or my concrete will always be strong if I use that. Okay, imagine using 53 grade and you only need to produce 25 M25 grade concrete. If you look up the free water cement ratio curve, you will end up with 0.55 or 0.6. So more amount of water you're trying to do to reduce the strength to bring your 53 grade to M25 grade. Okay, and anything more than 0.5 is not recommended by your IS code from durability perspective, 0.5 water cement ratio. So we have to be careful there. So to make normal grades concrete M25, M30, even M35, you don't need OPC 53 grade concrete. Okay. Next is the storage problem. The moment it's produced, it gets dumped, goes to landfill, or all these different batches of your fly ash keeps getting piled on top of each other. So from one room or one silo to another silo, if you go, even across the depth of the silo, the amount of fly ash or the quality might not be the same. So that adds to the issue also. Okay, and it's usually called as a waste, not as a pozzolana material when it's marketing. So that again creates nostalgia for the people. Next is the transportation cost. Thermal power plants are not always close by. Okay, so they're far. So if you're building it for a house, it may not be economical. Okay, but again, if you are actually a consumer of ready mix concrete and you tell you need fly ash in here, your cement manufacturers will actually procure it and they'll store it. So it makes better sense to have it there than for individual projects at your home. These days through India Mart also they're trying to reach out, but again you have to do your characterization to understand what kind of fly ash it is and the amount of calcium oxide in it. Okay. Next, lack of appropriate technologies for handling and transportation, no quality control, even your SCM or XRD might not be easily accessible. Okay. And even every time you don't get permission from power plant to get huge quantities of fly ash, so there is some bureaucratic work also that we need to address. Okay. Next, let's move on to silica fume. This is also called as microsilica or densified microsilica. Okay, depending on which company manufacturers and markets it. Pozzolanic material, it's a byproduct during the manufacture of your iron, ferrosilicon or silicon, and it's produced in electric arc using over 2000 degrees centigrade and in the manufacture of these ferrosilicon products, and there it comes as a byproduct. Okay, so it is dark gray or pink or white. Okay, so usually these are not coming to be the same color, etc. Okay, and it's 90% comes in crystalline form. Okay, so this is what we need in the non-crystalline form is what we need. It's almost 5 to 6 times the cost of Portland cement, so that's why we are using very low. It helps in better formation of your CSH gel. Okay.
Nakul sir?
Yes, madam.
Sorry for the interruption. I think there is some network issue, so there your voice is breaking.
Okay, let me try to connect to another source. Can you give me just 1 minute?
Yes, sure, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm back. Is the voice better?
So far, yes, sir. I'll let you know if there is any.
Okay, thank you so much, madam.
Thank you. Yeah.
So going back to the presentation. Okay, so small quantity of this is definitely beneficial in improving the properties of concrete, but not high amount because it's more expensive, and it helps in the better formation of CSH gel. So it comes in two colors. Sometimes it might be slightly different too, white or gray. Okay, depends on the kind of furnace that is used and which industry it's a byproduct of. So if you look at the microstructure of your 100% OPC mix, cement mortar only, so you can see some CH, calcium hydroxide, that is the light gray in the background. Okay, this is after 3 days of hydration. Okay, so to study how the microstructure is improving, and this is a 25% replacement of cement with silica fume. So you have 75% potent cement and 25% silica fume. Okay, so you have this. You can actually still see calcium hydroxide is a little bit smaller. The depth in or the width of your light gray shades are slightly changing. Compare that to this is your 10% silica fume. Okay, so here you can see still big chunks of your CH, calcium hydroxide rims. It's also for surrounding your 100% paste, and this is your 45% silica fume. Okay, so 55% of it will be your OPC, 45% you move. So you can see a lot of more pasty appearance in here, and calcium hydroxide is still around, but it's dispersed. And if you can look at the size from here to there, it's a reduction. So you've got more consistency. Because of this, you're also getting high early age strength. Okay, so definitely more durable, but again, it comes at a cost. Okay. So do we really need this much consistency, especially when you have other admixtures available, is something that we have to think about. Okay. And let's look at so the water demand increases in proportion to the amount of microsilica added due to its high fineness. Okay, so 1% microsilica you add, 1% extra water you will definitely have to add. Okay, and that's because it has affinity for water. To form more paste, you need it. So correspondingly, lower slump also is observed compared to other material, let's say like fly ash, but it gives more sticky and cohesive mix. Okay, so that's one other reason why you have to use a little bit low. Okay, so it's always used in conjunction with super plasticizer. Now that the workability is less, you're coming up with the chemical admixture to counter that. Okay, and microsilica makes fresh concrete sticky and hard to handle. Okay, that's why you have super plasticizer. And large reduction in bleeding. So it has an affinity for water, so definitely it can absorb if there is extra water in there. But now that extra water will be available for hydration and your strength might go low. So you still have to maintain the proper water cement ratio, but it can stop bleeding. Okay, reduction in segregation. So concrete has to be placed from a maximum of 1.5 meters height. So the lower the better. And so if you drop it from higher than that, it can lead to segregation. That means paste and aggregates can get separated. Now, since this is reducing that because it's more cohesive and sticky, transportation is a little bit easier and faster. Okay, including placing. But it's susceptible to shrinkage. Okay, this is definitely susceptible to shrinkage because it has so much pasty material. So now let's continue to look at the effects of silica fume, okay, on hardened concrete properties. So concrete containing microsilica shows outstanding characteristics in the development of strength. So what do we mean by that? Compressive strength and flexural strength are increased. Flexural strength is about 10% of compressive strength. Okay, so they still maintain the same correlation, but because of higher compressive strength, you get higher flexural strength also, and correspondingly high split tensile strength. Pore size refinement and reduction in permeability occurs when silica fume is used. Okay, the pore size is small. It's definitely doing a good job in filling the or improving the ITZ, interfacial transition zone. Correspondingly, durability is high, stiffness is high, which is measured by your elastic modulus. Okay, and creep and shrinkage is also increased. Okay, so whenever you're going beyond 15%, so that's why we want to keep the amount of paste a little bit less. And amount of air and training agent required for a particular volume of air is also required. When you have silica, so you need to add, along with fly ash, a little more air and training agent to get to the air content you want. With slag, it's relatively easier to achieve. Okay, so next. So reduction in alkali aggregate reaction is observed. So these are some of the advantages. So it has a better resistance to chemical attacks. Okay, it could be sulfates or chlorides. Corrosion rate is reduced. Carbonation depth is generally lowered. Okay, and good abrasion and erosion resistance you have. Fire performance is not very good. Okay, especially if you think a critical structure could be subjected to fire, silica fume would be the last ingredient you will go to. You will use it typically less than 5%, but then you have to also go with lightweight aggregates, at least 10% or 15%, and then with other supplementary cementitious materials. Okay, so that will create micro air voids in the cement, and sudden explosive failure will not happen because water vapor is trying to escape from your just cement and silica fume mixed concrete. Okay, and there might be slight expansion or shrinkage when you use more of your silica fume that we have to observe. So next, let's look at GGBS. Okay, so this is an industrial byproduct obtained during the production of iron. Okay, non-metallic, having oxide composition similar to that of Portland cement clinker. It can contain silicon aluminate, okay, of calcium, and but contains lesser calcium oxide. So relatively, you've seen that this has about 40% by mass of calcium oxide compared to over 60% that typical cement will have, but way more than fly ash. Okay, so this can be a hydraulic cement by itself because it has that much calcium oxide, but it needs an activator. So this is the concept beyond geopolymer concrete also. I have 1 or 2 slides on that. Okay, so you need a hydraulic activator or alkali activator just to cause that to set. But if you have cement, then that will take care of the setting, and this will take care of the hydration part, okay, forming your hydration products. So this also lowers the rate of heat evolved in concrete. So along with class F fly ash, so slag is also important, and refined pore structure is there, reduced permeability, okay, and improved resistance to sulfate attack or even chloride attacks, higher strength. See, all these supplementary cementitious materials, these are some of the common advantages you will be getting. Okay, next, marginally delayed reaction and slower strength gain. Okay, so if you're comparing how GBS concrete or blended concrete performs with your OPC, 3-day and 7-day, it's always behind OPC. Okay, 28 days and beyond, this will be higher. Okay, so that is something that we have to keep in mind. And what is the target strength that you require at 28 days? You can do a mix so that that 28-day strength can be achieved in 7 days or 14 days, even without accelerating admixtures. Okay, so you have to do a proper mix design to achieve that. Next, you have to ensure that there is sufficient curing, because that will result in better microstructure of your cement and durability compared to OPC, and improved resistance to marine environment, especially for chloride binding. So slag concrete is very good. So there's another slide I'll show in this regard. Apart from delaying the initial set strength and strength gain, slag does not significantly alter the fresh properties of concrete. Okay, so it increases the workability, but other than that, it doesn't contribute much to either the shrinkage or any other negative effects. Okay, the ultimate strength with slag are generally improved. The durability is also improved with the replacement by slag, especially in marine environments. Okay, so this is slide again taken from Dr. Manu Shantaram's lecture on advanced concrete technology in NPTEL course. Here they have rated from 1 to 4 how supplementary cementitious material will perform compared to its OPC counterpart under different exposure conditions. Okay, so 1 being the best, 4th being the worst. So if you look at chloride penetration, okay, at 28 days, your 50% slag is doing better compared to other mixes. Okay, your 50% slag concrete and 50% class F fly ash concrete are on top of the charts at 28 days time. So what do we mean by 50%? So 50% OPC, 50% class F fly ash. Here we have 50% slag, 50% OPC. If you look at just OPC, it's 4th. So adding any kind of supplementary material, if you see, it's better than your OPC. You can see your class C fly ash at 15% replacement is also on par with OPC at 28 days strength, resisting chloride penetration. If you look at your water sorptivity, okay, your 50% replaced slag concrete is doing very well. Okay, in fact, that's the only #1 position in here. You 30% class F fly ash and 50% class F fly ash are also rated the same. Even your 30% fly ash C is also rated second, along with few others, if you see. But at 50%, slag concrete is performing better. If you're looking at gas permeation, okay, so anything with supplementary cementitious material is definitely doing better than your OPC along similar lines. If you're looking at carbon dioxide penetration, okay, so this causes carbonation, correct? So your OPC mix is 1 and your slag mix at 15% is number 1. Okay, in reducing or withstanding the carbon dioxide penetration. That's because you have higher amount of calcium hydroxide in the mix already that's been hydrated when you have your OPC and slag. So the others are performing not so good, but at least in the range. You have second and third. So if you're designing a particular kind of sustainable concrete, you have to ask yourself what is the condition that it's going to be subjected to. You cannot say carbonation is a problem just associated with the cities because you have more vehicular traffic. It can also be in coastal areas or in any place where there is higher production of carbon dioxide. It could be an industrialized setting. Okay, it could be on burning of crops. We don't know. So wherever you have higher sources of your carbon dioxide being emitted, your structures can be subjected to carbonation. So this is not something an inland problem or a coastal city problem anymore. Okay, so you have to look at it in that sense. All right. And then correspondingly pick which kind of supplementary cementitious material will do justice to the kind of hazards the structure can face. So this is at 28 days. At 90 days, so beyond that, if you look, okay, so your 50% slag is #1 in terms of resisting chloride penetration, water sorptivity, gas permeability, okay, and at 90 days, OPC is also performing same. Okay, at 28 days, it was not so much, but at 90 days, okay, of continuous curing, it is on par with supplementary cementitious material. But if we are using this, there is more saving in the material because less amount of OPC is getting used. Okay, so I hope you can look at this chart and understand, okay, how to design some sustainable concretes. Now let's look at rice husk ash. This is also an approved supplementary cementitious material. So this has amorphous silica, 90% of it. It has to be burnt under controlled conditions only. Okay, only then, without environmental pollution, of course, only then it can qualify as a good quality rice husk supplementary cementitious material. Okay, without that, if it's not properly burnt, then you will have a mix of fibrous and powdery texture, and that is not great. Okay, you need a proper powdery material. That's why it has to be burnt at a standard temperature, okay, in controlled conditions to get proper ash. So this also enhances workability, okay, and it reduces susceptibility to acid attack. Okay, especially in industrial houses, chemical production plants, this might be important or a preferred admixture over fly ash. Okay, it enhances resistance to corrosion of steel. Okay, it reduces micro cracking again because of better strength and durability. It improves overall resistance to CO2 attack. Okay. Next is metakaolin. Okay, so these rocks are rich in kaolinite clay. Okay, rocks rich in kaolinite clay are basically used to produce metakaolin. These are also called as China clay. Look at the temperature, 600 to 700 degrees centigrade, almost half of what is required to make cement. Okay, is actually being used to produce metakaolin. That's why these are also not cheap. And when you're replacing cement, 5 to 15% is allowed by the code. Some researchers have recommended you can go up to 20%. I would say keep it under 10% unless you specifically need it. There are other supplementary cementitious material that can give you slightly better strength. There's no reason for going so high. Okay, but it gives you definitely high early strength. If you need very high early strength, you can go for it. Okay, and because of the filler effect, you're getting better strength, and also there is pozzolanic reaction. Okay, so improved strength, hydration, and durability is obtained in here. Metakaolin has a performance comparable to silica fume. Okay, since metakaolin is not a byproduct, its processing is an expensive affair that justifies the cost. Okay, and use of metakaolin is only recommended when you want high performance concrete and high strength concrete. Okay, so it has a specific purpose. So that's a picture of how metakaolin would typically look like. Next, you also have a sugarcane bagasse ash that can be used, also known as SCBA. This is high in silica and also should be burnt under controlled conditions to get the ash. Okay. So let's look at the silica content. This is from your sugarcane bagasse ash. You see it's 57.63. So this is right now seed SCBA. We can compete with micro silica, but it's less expensive. Okay, so that much silica is there, and silica fume has almost zero calcium oxide, but sugarcane bagasse ash has some amount of calcium oxide that can add to the benefit of your cement. Okay, so that way it can also improve the texture, provided this is available locally, okay, or can be procured. So that can also qualify. So now this is a Coulomb charge passed on your y-axis, and on the x-axis you have how much amount of cement is being replaced. The dark one is the 28-day cured concrete, and the gray one is actually 56-day cured concrete. So the lower the better. Okay, if the Coulomb charge is lower, that means it's less susceptible to corrosion. Okay, so a controlled concrete actually you can see has around 3,000 coulombs of charge when you do RCPT test. Now, if you're replacing by 25%, you can actually see how much reduction you've gotten. So it's gone from moderate risk to very low risk. Okay, even at 15%, it's actually doing better. Okay, so now let's look at the depth of penetration also here. And this is one YCAT test, and as and when the replacement is going higher, okay, and you can also see the depth of penetration is less. Okay, that means initial setting time is improved and it is better performing. Okay, so 15 to 25% is definitely recommended in that range. And if you can wait up to 56 days, you'll get more benefit out of it. But ensure that at 28 days, whatever strength is coming actually meets the client's requirements or the project requirements. Okay. If not, you'll definitely have to use accelerating admixture. Okay, so let's look at limestone calcined clay cement. This is also typically called as your LC3 cement. Okay, so LC3, this is a new kind of binder. Here you have 50% clinker, okay, 30% of calcined clay, and 5% gypsum, 15% limestone. Okay, so this can reduce carbon dioxide emissions by up to 40%. And here is the source from where we get this information. Okay, so and with limestone, basically you are combining low grade clay. It doesn't have to be a very high grade clay. Higher grade clay have higher amount of calcium oxide. Lower grade clay is also sufficient, and that when combined with your limestone and calcined clay and clinker will give you your LC3 cement. Okay, so this is like an alternative to your ordinary Portland cement, and this was actually produced in Switzerland. And it was initiated in 2014. They spent 3 years to see how this can be scaled up so it can be manufactured in bulk. They didn't want this to be like a lab project somewhere. Okay, so now about 40 cement companies in about 25 countries are directly or indirectly involved in utilizing and making concretes out of LC3 cements. Okay. So LC3 is an actual innovative blend of Portland cement, okay, that includes the addition of metakaolin or your low-grade calcined clay with limestone. Okay, the main component of LC3 is still clinker, okay, calcined clay, limestone, and gypsum. The main innovation in here is how these are combined together. Okay, with 15% of limestone, that will give a better synergetic effect and performance. Okay, when you introduce water compared to OPC cement. Okay, so from end user perspective, you can use it just as you would use a traditional cement. There is no change, but how it's produced, so it's actually the changes that has to be done at the manufacturer level, and end product for us is same as your Portland cement that we can use. Okay, now the additional alumina and the metakaolin reacts with the ground limestone, leading to a less porous material and providing equal strength or better. Okay, and kaolinite clay needed for LC3 is much lower grade than the pure kaolinite clay used in ceramic, and this is available everywhere. Okay, and we won't be competing with resources with other industries. And when you're using LC3 cement, you're using only 15% of limestone. So in the same amount of quarry that produces limestone, you'll be able to produce double or more the amount of binder material. Okay, so a same quarry can serve twice its life. Instead, if you're using that only to produce cement, if you switch over to LC3 based cement, so about 30 to 40% of carbon dioxide emission can be cut globally. Okay, and 1 to 2% reduction in carbon dioxide. Okay, so this is compared to OPC, and globally, if you're looking at 5% cement industries emitting, so in that 1 or 2% you can actually reduce if you switch over. Most of them switch over to LC3 based cement. So you are saving on scarce materials like limestone. Okay, and the performance is similar or better than OPC in most cases. And you can see it can meet the current demand of 4,200 metric ton of concrete, and it's still scalable. Okay, per annum it can meet so much, and it's still scalable. That means you can increase it if you need to. It saves about 25% overall in production, and LC3 can be used just as your OPC, and it's even better in performance. No special training required. Okay, just like OPC, you would use it, add your fine aggregate, coarse aggregate, water. So for an end user, it doesn't matter much. Okay, but you see here your traditional OPC base mix called Cement 1. It has 95% clinker material, 5% of gypsum. Okay, so amount of if you look at direct and indirect emission of carbon dioxide, okay, you will see about 95% is used in this process of clinker production, but when you're mixing it with gypsum, no amount of carbon dioxide is produced. So 95% is produced in here. If you're looking at your LC3 cement, that has only 50% clinker, so there's already some saving there, and for that you're adding calcined clay and limestone, and sometimes gypsum is also added in here. So when you do this, if you look, only the clinker production is emission intensive, so you have carbon dioxide there. For calcined clay, 50% is only required compared to the other. So for certain portion of calcined clay to begin the initial reaction, you are using carbon dioxide emission in there. For the other two process, when you're mixing it with limestone and gypsum, carbon dioxide emission will not be there. So in this process, you're saving about 30 to 40% of carbon dioxide. Okay, with this. And this is not something new. I know I told you in 2014 they started. 2014 that institute was started with website where they started advertising LC3. But for more than 10 years, okay, even prestigious institutes like IIT Delhi, IIT Madras, if you take their advanced concrete technology course, you will also have a chapter on this one dedicated to LC3 cement and how it's more stronger and durable than conventional concrete. In certain cases, they explain. So a lot of prestigious institutes are involved in the production and testing of these LC3 cements. Okay, so here if you look at the compressive strength versus age graph, the gray one being your OPC, okay, the green ones being your LC3 cement. LC350 means here 50% clinker has been used, remaining 50%, okay, is split between these three. Sometimes limestone is always fixed at 15%. Calcined clay can be 35% if gypsum is not used. So typically when they say LC350, you have clinker, clay, and limestone only. 35% clay, okay, 50% clinker. And higher the grade. So this means higher the grade of your clay, better the strength you're getting. Okay, so even if you use the best grade of clay at 1 day, it's lacking. From 3 days, it's increasing in strength. Okay, so anything more than 30% is actually comparable to your OPC mix. There is no change. So 30% grade clinker is better and above, okay, to compare to OPC. Now, this is another study conducted by your cement marketing expert, Cementis Group. Okay, so they studied what will be the IRR, internal rate of return, when we are using this LC3 cement in different scenarios. This cement manufacturer will understand what the scenario means. This means if you have a flash clinker, that's one case. If you have a rotary kiln, that's another case. So likewise, they have divided these scenarios. You can basically look in this document here to understand what those scenarios will be. They've explained along with kind of kiln, what kind of equipment the manufacturer may have for producing LC3. So if you have a source that is close to the plant, clay source, you can see you have more savings. That means quicker will be the rate of return on your investment. But if it's more than 200 kilometers away, it falls. So when you look at all these scenarios that typically a concrete plant can have, different kind of cement manufacturer plant, on an average about 25% savings you can get. So this is where that information is coming from. Okay, and this is without any additional policy incentives given by the government for using green green concrete. Okay, so we have this. Next, some case studies of using LC3 cement. They've actually made the Swiss Embassy building in Delhi. This is in Czech Dam in Horcha, and prefabricated. You can make your CMU blocks also in your basic construction material. You can have your pavers block. Okay, they have even built a model house in Jhansi. Not only in India, they have also in South American countries also they have built these model house as a technology transfer. So where they can show and tell, and you can also see in construction how it looks like. For a common eye, it doesn't matter, or we cannot even differentiate whether you have used cement or blended cement or LC3 cement here. Okay, so for multiple uses, it can be done. So I spoke about LC3 cement and how that can be slightly better than your OPC in making sustainable concrete. I have just made 1 or 2 slides on geopolymer concrete. Okay, so here you can see aluminosilicate is predominantly the binder material compared to calcium silicate that you will typically see in your OPC mixes. Okay, and this aluminosilicate can come from your clay, or it can even come from slag and fly ash. So in geopolymer concrete, typically you will see slag or fly ash as one of the main ingredients because that is easily available to us. And since there is no cement, you cannot add just water for these hydration. You need something to activate. Both of these are inert materials, okay, slag and fly ash. So you have to add an alkali activator. That means it's a mix of your sodium hydroxide and sodium silicate solution, or potassium hydroxide and potassium silicate solution. So you need to add both. Basically, this will be added with water to form a solution. And if you need proper workability and setting time, you have to monitor the molarity and the concentration of your ions in the mix, without which you can encounter flash setting or no setting at all. Okay, and workability will be very poor. So there is no standard mix design methods to produce geopolymer concrete. So I'm not going into too much detail of it, but this is one of the most sustainable ways of making a binder because you're using 100% waste. Okay, you can use clay or your slag or your fly ash. Okay, and then you are using alkali activators, potassium or sodium hydroxide based with water to make geopolymer concrete. So if you on YouTube, if you search the first house in geopolymer concrete, you will see near Chennai they have built a farmhouse. It's in the process of construction. By September of this year they want to complete it. They are doing prefabricated prefabricated panels including walls and beams and geopolymer concrete and assembling it at the site. Okay, so they are not using hydroxide, they are only using silicate. So, but we also have a house in Karnataka that's been done. If you're interested more in this, you can talk to Dr. Radha Krishna of RVC faculty, and he's actually done a house with Nirmiti Kendra, Karnataka, and they have actually built a geopolymer house and independent house. It's not a big one, but at least with 1 bedroom or this cost-effective housing. And you can actually see how it's performing, and it's already been about 10 years. It's withstood the test of time and it's still functioning well today, okay, compared to its OPC counterparts. So here, when I introduced you to geopolymer concrete, I told you how difficult it is. You need a chemical expert to advise you on what is the molarity of hydroxide and silicate and how, in what combination or dosage you need to mix them to make cement. So this company in UK, it's called Banasem, and they have taken that out of the equation. So they are going to give you a cement binder, okay, or a geopolymer cement, and they're also going to give you the alkali. So they'll characterize the material from the source, and they will actually give you 2 component system that you can use and mix. So when you order cement, you also get that chemical admixture with it. Mixing those 2 will give you the right amount of your concrete. Okay, so they procure aluminosilicate. Basically, aluminosilicate means any of these that are rich in alumina and silica from a known source. They characterize it, okay, and they put it into different batches. Now they know for which batch what should be the ratio of your silica to based on the silicate and aluminate ratios, what should be the molarity and strength of your alkali solution to interact with this to give you proper workability and your strength. So along with your geopolymer, it can come in a different color too. You also get this. Most of us who use epoxy would have seen we get component A, component B, we mix it, we get the required strength after you apply, correct? Similarly, they've made it that easy. So this is just one company that's producing geopolymer based cement in UK, but there are some more in Europe. Okay, in the last 2-3 years they have come up. So you can get strengths, look, up to 125 Newton per mm square without any issues. Okay, so we've discussed enough about cement. So now let's take a look at fine aggregate. Okay, so fine aggregate, you have your river sand, you have your M sand, then you have your pond ash or bottom ash, then you have your coarse slag. Okay, so fine, especially your river sand source is depleting, it's expensive. Many places they have put a ban on mining, so it's not easily procurable. So the most common one that we are going towards is M sand. So I'm going to be discussing that, but still you have your options. So whatever you collect at the top of the precipitator will be your fly ash, at the bottom will be your pond ash or bottom ash. As you can see, it has more coarse texture, so you can blend it with your M sand or river sand and use it as a partial replacement for fine aggregate, not cement. If you have fly ash, you can use that as a partial replacement for cement. Okay, same thing with the coarse slag too. So let's look at some of the advantages of M sand. M sand you usually get when you have that VSI crushers. Aggregates will be almost cubical shape or near cubical shape, it's pretty angular, and when that is getting crushed, rocks, you usually get your M sand as one of the byproduct. Okay, so now it can come in zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3 also. It depends on the source and the kind of rock that it's usually used for crushing. So typically granite rocks are used, so you do get M sand. That is a byproduct of your granite aggregate particles, so they can come in with high strength. When used in concrete, it will help in overcoming the deficiencies like bleeding, honeycombing, or segregation will not easily happen. Okay, now it can be economical. Okay, as procurement and transportation costs typically with the river sand will be higher. Okay, so your M sand cost is definitely lower. There are rock crushers, coarse aggregate producers in many places, but for river sand, you actually have to go and get sand from a proper source. So their transportation cost is usually higher. Sometimes they don't even let these big trucks cross state borders also, correct? So M sand is the next alternative that is scalable right now that we can go with. So it's economical compared to river sand, less environmental damage that can happen when you use this. Okay, so what are the disadvantages? I would like to call them as challenges when you use M sand. Okay, this crushed sand is coarser, has angular texture. That means it will be higher in water absorption. Sometimes there'll be more fines. Okay, that can also be absorbing in water. So how do you overcome this? You have to understand how much will be the water absorption capacity of your M sand before you use it in your concrete. If you don't do and you directly add it, it can become an issue. Okay, so when you're sampling M sand also for assessing the fineness modulus, doing the gradation, or trying to do the specific gravity test, don't take it just from the top of the heap. Mix it well, try to take a sample from the top, from the middle, from the bottom, from the side, a couple of places, because we don't want you to pick up only fines or only coarse particles there. So if you're blending that well and sampling well, you get a wholesome value of specific gravity that you can rely on, and the zone, associated zone. So this will help you in coming up with better mixed design. Also, if you take more fines, it will give you more water absorption capacity, and if you add so much extra water to compensate for that, more water will be available for hydration, and concrete strength can go through. So when you take a good sample of your M sand, it's easy to do, then you will see that whatever water absorption capacity you calculate will be sufficient. Okay, so you don't have to add any extra water. That whatever water it can absorb, it's in its inherent nature. You add that much extra water to your cement, and that will be readily absorbed by the sand particles. So that won't be available easily for the cement to hydrate. Okay, so you will not be losing out on the strength. If you don't do, now M sand has affinity for water, it will try to steal from water from your cement, and that reduces the workability, and correspondingly you have to use more high range water reducer. Okay, next is going on to coarse aggregate. This is a picture of your natural coarse aggregate that we are all familiar with. This is your recycled coarse aggregate. Sometimes it can be a little more dark colored or grayish color. Okay, sometimes they don't separate the mortar from the aggregates really well, so you have to pressure wash it. So there is some amount of process that it has to be going through before it's used in concrete. So good news is many of the recycled coarse aggregate manufacturers are stepping up and they are characterizing the concrete and or your aggregates well. So it's becoming more easy to access and use it. So now you can also have manufactured or artificial coarse aggregate. This is usually steel slag, okay? Or sometimes people even are experimenting with geopolymer concrete, correct? Sometimes flash sets, or you don't get good quality of your fly ash and slag to consistently produce geopolymer concrete, but you have a batch in your office or your lab. So people can actually mix that with your alkali activator. You're just making a block which will later get crushed into aggregates, and that aggregates you can use with your natural aggregates as a substitute, but you have made those aggregates in the lab. They might be a little more angular and flaky, but they're more reactive to your cement, and hence they can form better ITZ zones and hence can help in your strength development. So you're reducing, natural coarse aggregate will not last another 100 years if you keep consuming like this. So we have to find an alternate material. There are a lot of aging structures. So C&D waste we are basically using. So instead of going to landfill, if we properly process it, that can be a viable replacement for coarse aggregate, or at least you can go as high as 50 to 60% substitute your natural aggregates without compromising on the strength and durability. Okay, so since this is still an a developing topic, production of artificial aggregates and use in concrete, I'll focus a little more on recycled coarse aggregate here. Okay, so naturally recycled coarse aggregates comes from C&D waste. So when you're trying to use that, you're saving on the natural aggregate resources, so it's good for the environment, and these are cheaper than your conventional aggregates, hence the cost of concrete also comes down. But most importantly, you are saving the landfill space and doing more good to the environment. Had you not used this here, it will go for landfills. Okay, so now it's causing environmental damage and it's also affecting the environment. But recycling is also helping creating environment, good environment and more jobs. So definitely we have to go for it. So now these are the common disadvantages, but I'll call them challenges. Okay, so it downgrading of quality of concrete can happen. Why? Because you cannot always ensure the consistency of the concrete, recycled concrete aggregate. An M20 grade concrete might be crushed today and made into aggregates tomorrow. M100 grade concrete might be crushed and made into aggregates. So of course, since the source of the concrete is not same, it comes with different strength. Okay, so the quality of the aggregates can go down. So now there is of course more water absorption for the recycled aggregates because they have dust on them or they have a mortar layer on them. Okay, so it tends to be absorbing more water. So what you have to do absorption test of aggregates and use this. Do the absorption test of aggregates and then add that extra amount of water into concrete. So there's one extra test you have to do, but if you overdose it, it will reduce the strength. Okay, so sometimes decrease in compressive strength can be observed up to 30% if you start using recycled aggregate concretes in 10 to 20% range, they say. This I don't agree with 100%. Okay, I'll talk about that in the next slide. Of course, workability will reduce because it has more affinity for water. But if you add the required amount of water, then this issue will go away. Also, if you have water reducer, this issue can be overcome. Lack of specifications and guidelines, so there is no standard support right now. But as from an IS perspective or ACI document, but in the future more might come. But there are a lot of research papers that will help, and less durability of RAC typically. But there are some papers that are telling you'll definitely get more strength and more durability if you go for RAC. How? When you're using the recycled concrete aggregate, you have to go with the TSMA approach, two-stage mixing approach. Okay, in here you're basically mixing your concrete ingredients in 2 stages. This ensures uniformity in paste formation and also aggregate water absorption. Okay, first the fine and coarse aggregates are mixed for 60 seconds. This is a minimum, after which 50% of the water is added and mixed for another 60 seconds minimum. Okay, so that is your part A. Next, you will go with the other amount cementitious material. It can be your cement plus supplementary cementitious materials and added and mixed with this for another 30 seconds to a minute before okay, or later, then you add water, remaining water, and mix for another 2 minutes. Okay, so this is how much you will do. So these are the 2 stages in mixing. In the first stage, half of the required water when you add, it helps in formation of your cement slurry on the surface of existing recycled concrete aggregate. Your recycled aggregates will have that water. It will help in forming paste with it, or that will absorb some of the water. So it won't steal from your concrete, and also it will help in uniformity. Okay, you will get better mixing quality and better workability when you're doing a large patch of concrete. When you do this, also water can help permeate some of the pores of your old cement mortar, filling up some cracks and voids. In the second stage, when you're adding remaining water and mixing of the cement, now you have more paste that will fill up the or cover the remaining of your particles, your virgin aggregate as well as your recycled aggregates. So this 2-stage mixing process is what will give you better strength. So we've done this at our own university, and we've seen up to 70% of replacement is possible. However, we are recommending, this was in a lab, so we could easily go for 50 to 70% replacement without compromising the compressive strength of concrete. In fact, we got 20 to 30% better strength, compressive strength and flexural strength and split tensile strength. Now we are also doing acid tests on it to study how durable that is going to be in the long run. Okay, we are also studying the effect of acid attack and salt attack on this recycled aggregate concrete. But we were getting this better results only with TSMA approach. If without TSMA approach, you take recycled aggregates, treat it as a normal aggregate would do, and then if you add water in the end, okay, or a single stage conventional mixing, if you do, you may not get the required strength. There'll be loss of workability and also decreasing compressive strength. So when you're using these kind of materials, ensure that you're following the best practices in the industry for mixing and placing concrete. Okay, so that's what I wanted to tell. And just I'll briefly touch on this, and then we will look at more applications of these concretes. So manufactured aggregate or your artificial aggregate. Okay, so this is the European standard code. And whatever you're manufacturing from an artificial source or from an industrial process comes under this category. Sometimes you can also produce it from industrial byproducts such as steel slag from the iron and steel industry that you get. All these, when you are using them in your aggregates or even in the clinker process, those are manufactured or artificial aggregates. So it's possible to produce these aggregates with good mechanical properties. So I told you briefly how you can use geopolymer concrete that might not be scalable for the field, but that is flash setting, etc., or a poor grade of batch of your GGBS and fly ash can be combined with alkali activators to form aggregates. Okay, and that can be more reactive. So you can add these aggregates with your virgin aggregates, and that will react with your cement to form better hydrated products or stronger concrete. But you may, these shape will be different batch after batch. You're not going to be using a big crusher to get uniform size of aggregate, so they end up being flaky depending on how you're going to crush them, and the angularity may change, the texture might be smooth, it may not be so rough, etc., compared to your virgin coarse aggregates, and that might affect your results a little bit. So we have to be careful with the third approach. But if you're getting it from an industrial source, steel slag, etc., if it's possible to do, use it. So this will definitely make for a sustainable concrete. Okay, but our main focus should be on using the recycled concrete aggregate or recycled aggregates. Okay, because that's available in plenty. Now the industry has switched to grading them, characterizing them. You are going to get it with standard quality, okay, or consistent quality. Specific gravity that is rated for a particular batch is believable, and you'll get better consistency and results if you use recycled aggregates from a proper source. Okay. Now, I just wanted to share with you some batch tickets that are usually you will get at a site. Every truck that delivers concrete at a site usually gives you a batch ticket like this one. This is for a 12 cubic yard pour. Okay, it shows you how much sand, stone, this is in pounds per cubic yard, cement, slag, etc. is being used. You see, this is a slag based concrete. All they specified was we need 4000 psi concrete. So that's basically like your M30 grade concrete, 4000 psi. That's all they said for the job. Okay, and depending on whether it's going to be a mass concrete, they'll add slag, or if it's going to be for a roof, they can change it to fly ash. Whatever proportion they are going to use it 4000 psi or M30 grade concrete you need at the end of 28 days. They will ensure that this mix meets that criteria. Okay, you don't have to say I need only 100% OPC mix. That kind of practice should be avoided. But you can look at the industry trends on how they're going to be using these supplementary cementitious materials to produce sustainable concrete. In many states, especially in developed countries like even in US, okay, every state has a statute that says you have to use some kind of a supplementary cementitious material in cement, because they don't have limestone quarry. Most of their cement gets imported from China. So they say to save on that, you cannot use 100% cement in any of the project unless it is specifically required by DOT, Department of Transportation. So most of them usually use here. But in our countries, here we see that people always say, no, we need 100% OPC grade, cement only, and no SCM should be added in the mix, which might be incorrect. For big jobs, the amount of cement that you will save on price and compared to even the manufacturer, the cost of production and wholesome, if you look at environmental benefit, is big. So this is the second part of the batch ticket. On the top, they will tell you what is the grade of concrete, how much quantity they're producing, what kind of admixture is there. Winter concrete means all the aggregates were kept in a temperature controlled environment or were heated before it was produced, because sometimes they can come at very early morning or late, and or the previous night it would be snowing and freezing. So this was in a project in New York. So you can see these kind of tickets we have to use for quality controls. Okay. Sometimes they deliver concrete and they don't even tell you what the ingredient in it is, which is bad. So now let's look at Cadillac Center in New York, and I'll tell you why this mix is sustainable. Okay, so in here, they were actually renovating a building, converting that into an office plus, a mall. So previously, what was an office, now they were converting bottommost floors to 3 floors to a mall and top 3 floors to an office. So they already had an existing slab structure. They were trying to increase the thickness of it to take care of the heavy footfall coming in, etc. So they went with lightweight aggregate. You can see 100% lightweight aggregate was basically used. On top of an existing 3-inch slab, they were adding another 2.5 inches at certain places, 3-inch at certain places of concrete. Okay, so before they added even that new concrete on top of the old concrete, they added the binder. Okay, so that it's a binding agent, and then on top of that they place a reinforcement cage, and then on top of that they laid the concrete. So what interesting thing they did was adding polypropylene fibers and Zypex C500 in site. Okay, so this is your water proofing admixture. Okay, that's what it's marketed as. So these two are being added at this site. This was not required. I asked them, why is this required? Okay, and especially why are you doing it at the site? The engineer actually told that in the future, if there is going to be a maintenance problem because a water pipe burst, there was some or snowing and something happened and the slab froze, I'll have to close the street for maintenance work, and that is more expensive. I have to take permission from the city, and for every day the traffic they have to divert, I have to pay for it. So that's why I'm trying to use these polypropylene fibers, so that there will be very little wear on the surface. And the Zypex C500 is a waterproofing admixture. In the future, it will prevent corrosion, so that will increase the service life of the structure. So that's what was his response. Even for a project like this, they were actually thinking far ahead. And although the RMC truck gave this at the site, they were actually using this 3 minutes. They added and mixed, and then they poured it. Okay, I have some pictures. If we have some time in the end, I'll show for this case. But this is the important aspect. Brooklyn Bridge rehabilitation project that we worked on. If you see, this is for the approach span of Brooklyn Bridge, and this is that iconic structure in New York. Here, they did not tell you how much the strength of concrete should be. This is one of the requirements they gave for the contractor who was trying to build the approach span. They said the concrete that you produce, okay, when subjected to water pressure of 150 psi, okay, this is in kilopascal, for 5 days. Okay, they're telling how much the water should be permeating through the concrete, no more than 1.5 mm. And then it says when subjected to water producer pressure that's gradually increasing over 5 days. So you start with 0 on the first day, and at the end of 5 days, it's 100 psi. Okay, sorry, at the end of 10 days, it's 100 psi. It should not, there should be no water permeation. So gradually increasing to 5 days, and that is maintained steady for another 5 days for a total of 10 days, and no water should have entered the concrete. So when tested 28 days after placement, Okay, the compressive strength of the waterproof concrete, whatever you produce, at least should be 5% better. So I know when we are using chemical or mineral admixture, this is easy to overcome. So that was one of the things we were confident we could do. But look at the other two. Then you also had to subject this concrete to 300 freeze-thaw cycles, okay, at 94%, and the durability should be at least 94%. Okay, so that is what they said. And when you put this concrete in water or allow it to cure in water and you test it, the water, it should not have leached any harmful ingredients. That means a drinking water should be a drinking water. Okay, so of course Brooklyn Bridge is standing on water, so they didn't want to pollute that when they use this new grade of concrete. So this was the testing requirement that came through. Many companies did not take it. I was working at NGIT. JPCL approached me and I told we could try. And I started calling admixture companies on what kind of chemicals they had to help us. So Bandex had this Bandex AM10 and Zypex C500. So that's another company that had this. Okay, so we basically did the project, and I can show you the test results here real quick with some pictures. So constant head permeability test, that means for 120 hours, we actually had that 150 PSI of pressure on concrete. Okay. And then we had to follow that Army Corps specifications. Okay, we could not use a standard water penetration tester. Also, we had to use Army Corps, that 73 standards only, and that was not available in all of the labs because it was outdated. We were doing this project in 2016 or 2015. So what we did, we took these cells that they use in soil testing lab. We covered our concrete with the membranes on the outside, and then we put water, subjected it to water pressure, and we monitored how much water was getting through that pressure gauge in here over 1 week. Every 2 hours somebody was coming and taking a look at the data. So this is at the end of the test how it was. Okay, no cracks, no fissures, anything. And then we split it horizontally, vertically around the length, and we tried to see how much water was going. Just in this tip portion you could see some water had come, and that was about I guess in the results. Other place there was no water ingress at all. I think we got about 0.5 mm of moisture had entered in there. Okay, through one of the crack, but we had up to 1.5 mm that was permissible. So this test, it passed. Okay, so it passed the test. Next is that variable head permeability test. Same thing we used, but it was over 15 days. It was gradually increasing for 5 days, then another 10 days, it maintains the same pressure of 100 PSI. No water should get through. Same test we have done with 3 sets. So we have 3 cylinders. We actually use a shorter one here because that's what was available. And then you see when we cut, nothing, there was no water inside in here. So how did we do this mixed design? Basically, we ended up doing a 6,000 PSI concrete mixed design. Because 4,000 was normally what everybody would use, equivalent to M30. So we said we will go slightly higher because at bridge decks, everything was at 8,000 PSI level, M45 grade. So we said, let's settle at 6,000 or 6,000 PSI, somewhere in M35 to M40 grade range. And for that, we did the mixed design as per ACI 211. That's the only thing we did. Only unique thing we did was adding that extra chemical admixture, which was Zypex C500. Okay, so some samples were made here. You can see for freeze thaw samples, this is the standard sample size that we had to produce. So the naturally maximum size of aggregate we used was about 0.75 inches, that is 20 mm in the production of this. That is what is typically used unless it's mass concrete. Okay, and they have measured the dynamic modulus of elasticity, and you can see 94% has to be there at least. So we ended up with 96%, so slightly better. Okay, so we also passed the freeze thaw test, and this is the final mix design that we gave them. Okay, so if you look, this is in kg per meter cube. Okay, they took the data in SI units and later converted to this thing. English units also to see if there will be any loss during conversion for the amount of concrete produced. And Zypex C500, as you can see, was the admixture that was used. That's the waterproofing admixture. So we used about 1.5% or 1.8%, and the maximum that we could use was 2%. Okay, so with that, you can see there are some other admixtures used. We have air entraining admixture. So in minimum, we have to have 5% air. That was the requirement. And Glenium. Okay, this is basically a water reducer. This is your set retarder. Okay, BASF XR. So in case you have transportation issues or traffic issues, you know how New York gets. So they always add this as a safety. This is a hydration stabilizer. It only affects your initial setting time, not your final setting time. Okay, so that's what they had used. And with that, the only other admixture we used was Zypex C500. See, along with the OPC, cement 300, we were also using fly ash and silica fume. Fly ash and silica fume. So we made this a sustainable concrete, but we could have still optimized. We had very little time to turn this around. If you see how much time is required for the freeze-thaw testing, they do 28 cycles a week. Almost 10 weeks was required to complete 300 cycles. Okay, now number of cycles per week depends on how big your machine is and how many samples you have in there. They might be testing for other people's also, right? So it took almost 28 cycles, and almost 9.5, 10 weeks later we were done and they gave the results. So because of all that planning we had to do, we could not do too many trials, but if we had more time, we could have definitely optimized the mix here. So we could have reduced the amount of Zypex C500 mixture also that we could use in the project. Okay, here is the compressive test results. Okay, for that admixture, concrete with Zypex C500 admixture. So in about 28 days, we have definitely got more than 6,000 PSI. That was the target strength. So at 56 days, it's continuing to cure. So you can see it's almost at 8,000 PSI. Okay, more than what we need. So in 7 days itself, we were almost like 90% of the target strength we had reached. So the customers were happy. Next, in your spare time, I will request you to go through this ASCE concrete canoe competition. I think in Bangalore, only RVCE has an active ASCE chapter that still makes canoe and races. But this is a program that's organized annually by American Society of Civil Engineers. It's a very prestigious event, or an occasion for a university if their students win in ASCE, one of these competitions, or the beam casting competition organized by American Concrete Institute every year. Okay, so a lot of teams participate in it, and they do make canoes with concrete, and you see they're supposed to race in it. Yeah, up to 4 people can be in it, all male, all female, and co-ed race they have. First step is they have to ensure that this doesn't fail in it. Okay, they have to ensure that the boat will not collapse. So 50 kgs of load is basically added in here. So they eliminate coarse aggregates. No coarse aggregate is used, no fine aggregate is used. Okay, they instead use plastic sphere and glass spheres. Okay, so they go for the ultra lightweight aggregates, and they use CFRP as a reinforcement in there, because even an M10, M15 grade concrete will work. They just need to take care of the flexure load or the waves hitting the boat. If they take care, they'll be good. So a lot of mixes are in here in the second link. So the PPT will be shared. You can actually go through that. You can see how sustainable mix can be produced. And this is a concrete that floats in water. Even if you make a cube or a cylinder and you put it in water, it floats. Okay, so it's not the shape of the canoe that's making it float. Concrete itself will float. So I think I'm running out of time. So I'll just play this 2-minute video. Okay, then we'll talk about carbon cure. That we can stop, and I'll take questions.
The Carbon Cure technology is made up of 2 boxes: the control box, which is the brains of the operation, and the valve box. The valve box connects to a CO2 tank and delivers a metered quantity of CO2 into the concrete mix. The CO2 is stored on site in a pressurized tank provided by industrial gas companies. The control box monitors the performance of the valve box system in real time and feeds back all usage data to the Carbon Cure command center. The control box software integrates seamlessly with all existing batching software, so adding CO2 into a mix is just like adding an admixture, meaning no impact on batching or loading cycle time. Transfer hoses deliver liquid CO2 from the supply tank to the Carbon Cure valve box, which is at the plant loading area. The valve box then meters and delivers a known amount of CO2 into the concrete mix based on the cement content of the mix. The CO2 automatically injects into the mix once roughly half the cement and water contents have been discharged. While liquid CO2 is stored in the tank on site, the CO2 that comes into contact with the concrete is actually in a solid and gaseous state, similar to dry ice or snow. It changes state once it leaves the CarbonCure valve box due to a significant drop in pressure. Upon contact with the mix, the CO2 undergoes a chemical reaction and converts into a mineral, calcium carbonate, which makes the concrete stronger. Plus, what was once CO2 is now eliminated, never to be re-released into the atmosphere, even if the concrete structure is demolished.
Okay. So basically, carbon dioxide in liquid form from various industry sources is actually taken and then utilized, and in a gaseous form, it's fed into the mixer when concrete is getting mixed, and when water interacts with cement, calcium hydroxide is getting formed. So there is enough carbonate in there. So your carbon dioxide can also interact with water that is introduced to your cement and form calcium carbonate. Higher the amount of calcium carbonate, more ettringite crystals and better bond. So basically, these technologies are being used by some of these companies, and we need to encourage them when such technologies also come. Okay, so here you can see when they use with carbon dioxide, they're definitely getting slightly better strength, but no less strength. Okay, so it's not less, it's higher strength they're getting. And imagine how much concrete or carbon dioxide was basically consumed in the process, and it's going to stay locked in it for future. So they've done a lot of durability tests, etc. The details is in this document here. You can take a look at it. This was produced by or perfected by a Canadian company that have licensed it to Thomas Concrete. They've actually built a structure also that is LEED certified now, and it's in Atlanta, Georgia. They did it in 2018. Started off with one company, now it's 22 companies, 22 plants of Thomas Concrete now that's using the same technology, not just one. So they're doing a lot of these good things, making concrete more sustainable by taking some of the carbon dioxide that's basically produced when you're making cement and integrating now into concrete to make concrete. Okay, the same carbon capture technology is going to be used by a Swedish company. And I included this slide because they are expecting the government also to contribute money. And it was about 100 million euros for retrofitting, and how even the government is basically pooling in resources to help such companies so that environmentally friendly concrete can be produced. And by 2025, nearly a third of the emissions will be cut. And by 2030, you will see how much amount of carbon dioxide they are producing. Exactly in the manufacture of concrete will actually be negated by how much they're consuming to make concrete. Okay, so similarly, you have this Cristo-based company, Chryso company. They are making EnviroMix concrete. Okay, so this is made up with supplementary cementitious materials, and they have given a new name to it because it has now lesser carbon footprint, and they're also making admixtures, okay, that tend to absorb carbon dioxide when you're mixing it with concrete. And they have these two mixes, EnviroMix and EnviroMix ULC, that will scrub carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Basically, they're acting as the water reducers, and when it hardens, it binds carbon dioxide in the atmosphere chemically. So these are eco-friendly admixtures that we can use in our concrete. We are using them anyway. We're using them anyway in our concrete, correct? So might as well use these environmental friendly concrete to produce different grade of concrete. Okay, next is Florida Gulf. They're actually using reefs, artificial reefs, made out of concrete to rejuvenate. How much corals have been, dying at an alarming rate. About 50% of the world's coral reefs are gone. So here also they're using supplementary cementitious materials and related air and drained concrete to make it. Even some old concretes that are being left out in precast plants, they're basically using it. It's perfected by, or spearheaded by rather Florida Gulf Coast University. They're going to make reefs with these old concrete. So it's an environmentally friendly way to dispose of it. Instead of just thinking as an old structure, I'm only going to make recycled aggregate out of it and going to put it in new concrete. So they found sustainable way of using that concrete. So likewise, you can also make AAC block. Okay, I'll just skip through this. With rice husk ash, that's more porous, and definitely that will do slightly better. No coarse aggregates are being produced. You see, most of the structures that we use today are portal frame structures. The load from the slab is being carried by the beams to the columns to the foundation. So we no longer need solid CMU blocks or load-bearing walls. So we can consider these eco-friendly blocks or even fly ash bricks as alternatives in construction. So that will reduce the dead load, save on foundation footprint. Lesser footprint means lesser amount of steel and concrete consumed in the process. Now, this company with the Finland, Skanska, with the Finland Tampere University, is also looking at how old structures can be reused if it is carefully dismantled. Okay, so this is a 4-year project. So they've received 12.5 million funds. Okay, so with MyVan technology, you're basically seeing how one entire floor is erected in a day. When it reaches end of the life cycle, which can happen a couple of years down the lane, or something happens with it, if you're carefully deconstructing it, can you reuse precast concrete later for some other purpose is being studied. So some years down the lane, we might be able to get that. This is again self-healing concrete. This is different than your self-curing concrete or bacterial concrete, because they are using the enzyme from the found in the bloodstream that is good in carrying carbon dioxide around. Okay, so they are using that as one of the admixtures that will go into dry cement. And now what happens is, whenever there is a crack, calcium carbonate is instantly formed based on this Ca type enzyme that they have used with cement. So 1 millimeter crack can be repaired in 24 hours. And now they're looking at it in slightly different way, where an existing crack that has not been made with, let's say, the self healing concrete, if they can add proper admixture with these enzymes, if it can be repaired, and they are finding some progress in that work, still in development stages, and they are expecting a 20-year structure can be extended service life up to 80 years if you use this. So this is an interesting read. So the method has also been patented. This is better than your biological concrete, bacterial concrete, because bacteria need something to feed on, or we don't know how long it can stay in the concrete in its idle state. Okay, so but in this will be an excellent answer for such cases. So similarly, lighter weight concretes have been produced with different blends, but been marketed as eco-friendly concrete and even patented by many countries. Okay, so they are all producing sustainable concrete, but with lighter weight aggregates, a combination of SCMs, and achieving success and even patenting the process. So I'm pretty sure we can also do something like this back here, and also encourage companies to produce lighter weight concrete, or use concrete from companies that have lower carbon footprint. So when there is a need, companies will start to stick to it. Now, in other companies, they're doing it because LEED certification is important. Utilities will be sold to companies at a lower price. That's how government is supporting if the buildings are LEED certified, and they're using, instead of recycled, upcycled construction waste materials. Okay, so these concrete companies, whenever concrete is not utilized, they bring it back to the plant. They know they have separate bins for pouring concrete, unused concrete in a specific bins, and now that is broken down after 10 or 14 days and then made into recycled aggregates. So they have control over their own aggregates, leading to better output. So here they have used in this, I thought it was an Indian university that has actually patented a method. Here they're using microsilica and nanosilica in your concrete to make it sustainable. So we've already discussed the use. Along with that, fly ash is added, so that makes it a little more stable, so that can increase the fire rating of a structure. Without fly ash, you can have explosive failure, and this is not recommended. Now, when they have these 3 admixtures in a particular proportion, they're getting very better strength, and that method of making high cementitious material is patented in India and Australia. So you can read there. So all these are examples of a lot of supplementary cementitious materials being used, and now I'm telling it should be required, not just encouraged. We have to have student competitions also in the area of green concrete to encourage students to use this. So they get an understanding of it. And we have to ensure 3 C's during construction: ensure that there is sufficient cover, proper compaction is provided, curing is provided. If not, even the best sustainable mix that you provide to the field will not give you any meaningful increase in service life. So this is important. And durability, performance-based specification should become the norm. In the future, we don't want to say, I just need M40 grade concrete. I should be in a position to say, I need M40 grade concrete that will perform in area that has high carbonation. So there will be no carbonation setting in even 2 mm from the surface, or like how we had the Brooklyn Bridge project after 150 psi of water pressure for 7 days, no water should have ingressed. Like that, performance-based specification should become the norm, not just compressive strength. Only then people will wake up and make more sustainable concretes. And it's everybody's responsibility, not just the consumer or the producer or the regulatory body. It's everybody's responsibility to go for more durable and sustainable concrete mixes. So with that, I think I've consumed a lot of time. I would like to say thank you. We have discussed how to use cement, replacement for fine aggregate and coarse aggregate. Let's not try to do all in the same concrete mix. If not, you'll end up with something different than what you initially planned for. Okay, so use it judiciously.